Good evening. More than 10,000 people now have crossed the English Channel and been processed through Dover since Keir Starmer became the Prime Minister. That includes 801 who came on Saturday alone. It brings the total since this whole thing began to an incredible 137,000. But it's all going to be OK because we have a new Border Security Command and we're going to put a £75 million investment into it, money that we won't be now spending on Rwanda. And the plan is that the National Crime Agency will work together with MI5 and other agencies, but also will work with Europol, and there'll be National Crime Agency officers in Bulgaria, one of the places where dinghies and engines get smuggled in, and across Europe. But the question, I suppose, is, will this work? Love to get your thoughts on that, Farage at gbnews.com. I have to say, I have no great confidence that it will, because it seems to me that if you smash the gangs, even if you do smash the gangs, the money these people can make is so great that others will come and fill their places, rather like sort of whack-a-mole. I just don't believe it's going to work. I don't believe it can be done. I'm joined tonight in the studio by Richard Drax, former Conservative Member of Parliament, by Matthew Talbot, former Labour advisor. But first, I'm going to go to Dr. Mike Jones of Migration Watch UK. I suppose, Mike, in fairness to Starmer, the fact we now have National Crime Agency officers embedded with other police forces around Europe might give us better intelligence.
Well, yeah, I mean, in theory, I'm not against a more sort of transnational, international approach to the illegal migration crisis because it's a transnational phenomenon. But we're already doing this. We did this under the Conservative government. We have cooperation with Turkey. We have cooperation with France. We cooperate with Europol, Frontex, the European Commission. So this transnational approach is already taking place.
Are you really saying that all the Labour government are doing is more of what was happening already?
Yeah, it's imitation, but under a different name. So, you know, we now have this sort of central command unit, but Priti Patel essentially had a very similar organisation, the CCTC, and it effectively did what the Starmer government is now intending to do. Now, in principle, I'm not against governments from doing this. If you can share information, make life difficult for the gangs, for so on, I'm fine. But you can't smash the gangs by doing this. You have to make their business model redundant. And how do you do that? You need to detain and deport. You need to get rid of people.
As we used to do.
Yeah.
And not that many years ago. So you're not particularly confident this is going to make much difference?
It will make a difference at the margins, but it's not going to solve the issue.
No. Well, Matthew Talbot, this was an issue that did the last government enormous electoral harm. I mean, enormous electoral harm. And it's an issue that, particularly in the Red Wall, those Midlands, and not purely, but those Midlands and Northern seats, this issue still resonates. Starmer's got a problem, hasn't he?
Yeah, I think whoever would have won earlier this year would have had a problem. And I think, you know, I don't mind liberal levels of immigration if, and there is a big if there's the infrastructure there to sustain it. And at the moment, we've been let down by successive governments who haven't built enough houses, enough schools, maybe allowed too much cheap labour to come in during New Labour's era. If this is more tinkering around the edge, where parties such as the Conservatives or maybe your own can capitalise, they have got a huge problem. I actually think safe and legal routes could have helped ease this. And I can see the grimaces from the pair of you.
Well, I mean, here's the point, right? We have actually taken 500,000 refugees since 2016. It's an unbelievable number, albeit quite a lot from Ukraine, some of whom may go back. I don't know. We'll see. But it's not as if we haven't been very, very generous. The problem with this is illegal immigration being pursued by criminal gangs. It's 90% young men unidentified young men. I mean, I believe it's actually a national security emergency.
No, it may well be. I think the problem is it can be termed illegal immigration, but obviously there isn't really illegal immigration, because if you're to travel via whatever means...
Well, what else are we going to call it?
Well, listen, the law needs changing then if that's the case. I understand the point you're trying to put forward.
Well, Labour want to tell us it's called irregular migration.
Yeah, well, maybe that's the case. I think with regards to refugees, I think 95%, 99% tend to go to the next neighbouring country. So again, we've taken a lot in, but compared to the vast majority of the world, this is why Jordan has 1 million refugees. You know, that we're not seeing the levels of numbers they've had.
Well, and we're not the rest of the world. Richard, you know yourself as a Conservative Member of Parliament in the last administration, it hurt your party hugely.
Yes, it did. One problem I think everyone's got, and Europe is waking up to it, is free movement of people. The Germans are now causing quite a lot of angst in the EU by saying they want their borders back. Well, I mean, well done, Germany. Let's all wake up to the real world. If that was reintroduced, that would have a huge impact on these gangs, because they wouldn't be able to flow through these countries and get to France, which is a safe country. And the second point, I think this is a threat to national security. I agree with you entirely. I think it's a matter now for the armed forces, I would say. And I would say we need some sort of ships in the middle of the channel to say no further. That's it. And if they get there, they're turned around and sent back. Now, I know this would cause a huge noise with France. We'd have a sort of Cod War situation, no doubt. Yeah. But at least we'd make the point to the gangs. You get to the middle of the channel, and we will make every effort we can to put these illegal migrants, as you rightly say, back into boats, safe boats, and take them back to France.
Yes, we couldn't tow back those dinghies.
They're
not safe boats.
You have a whole lot of boats out there.
So you need the Royal Marines.
And they just take them straight back.
But, can I just ask Richard whether you felt Boris Johnson may have missed a trick in 2021? Because I think the thing that riles a lot of people up is because we have this constant daily commentary and scenes of people crossing the channel, which first of all is extremely dangerous, and we sadly see people dying. Second of all, there's gangs making a huge trade out of this, and it's a huge issue that we do need to stop. In 2021, the Interior Minister of France said, well, I'll tell you what, it's doing both of our heads in. Why don't we process them at northern France? Therefore, you're stopping the danger of people coming across and potentially loss of life. But also you can do the processing to see if they really are refugees. You're therefore not having people put up in bed and breakfast, temporary accommodation, because that's a whole other racket. These hotels that are signing contracts with the government where they're making millions off putting people up.
Well, I don't know about processing, but we are spending, I'm not quite sure how much, but many, many billions of pounds to the French government to protect their northern
well, actually,
these boats are still coming.
It's about 500 million.
And with all the modern technology, I cannot understand how these boats are not spotted.
Well, the point...
you've got...
Do you know what? I mean, it's easy to blame the French. Truth is, they've got hundreds of miles, square miles of sand dunes. They're taking off on beaches across a 100-mile stretch. It's not easy. It's not easy. Moving on to an issue that is downstream from this... And it's about a lack of integration. It's about a clash of cultures. It's about the appalling story that broke in Rotherham, you'll remember, back in 2014. Well, the law does move very, very slowly. But finally, a group of men were in Sheffield Crown Court last week, and they received very, very long prison sentences. 7 men, 106 years of prison sentences. Astonishingly, GB News were the only media organisation that covered the story. And one of the girls, who'd been repeatedly raped, etc., had in her victim impact statement that she hoped that the Pakistani man who had done this to her at the end of his lengthy prison term was deported back to Pakistan. And the judge removed that from her victim impact statement. Maybe it's no surprise we have a case in Rochdale where somebody who was a serial abuser, 9 years on, is still living in the same community as his victims, as he goes through a legal process and claims that because of his human rights, he can't be deported, and then claims that he's renounced his Pakistani citizenship. And it is just the most astonishing story. Richard, only GB News there. It's as if we're just brushing this all under the carpet. It's all too difficult.
I would have hoped that after the past case, this would have really been, there would have been a different attitude to all this. It seems that people are terrified, and news organisations, and I include in this, to actually say what it is. These are, in the main, Pakistani men, sick paedophiles, preying on vulnerable young girls. Now, to them, these girls are nothing more than meat.
Yeah.
This is completely unacceptable. And if they're not British citizens, they should be sent straight home, back to where they came from. If they are, as they have, they've been jailed for many years, and so they should be.
Absolutely shocking, Matthew, the whole thing, shocking. And it was covered up at the beginning. It was covered up, the police knew, everyone knew. And still, even when we get to this stage, the British media seemed reluctant to talk about it.
Mm. Yeah, and it only fosters further discontent in communities that feel, rightly or wrongly, as second-class citizens sometimes, or feeling like they're put last. And it shouldn't be the case. I think, I'm not sure, and I'm happy to be corrected, whether it is a majority of Pakistani men. I think
it was in Rotherham, yeah.
In Rotherham, yes.
Overwhelming.
Take that, that's fine. I think the bigger issue that may play out with these sort of issues is the woman in question, bless her, was saying, she hoped this person would be sent back from whence they came. And I think the problem is, once somebody has been here long enough and is a British citizen, we can't do that, obviously. Now, the punishment is he's been given a long prison sentence and whatever else. I suppose the concern is why the judge took it out. I can only assume, and I hope not, that it's further proof of he didn't want any sort of incitement. And I think it's good that we have an independent judiciary and whatever else, but I think it's quite wrong when we're telling people what they can put in their impact statement.
Yeah, that's right. And particularly the girl who's gone through that. In a sense, Mike, I mean, this one's a funny one because in the way that he's renounced Pakistani status and therefore Pakistan say they won't have him. But when it comes to any form of deportation, we are up against ECHR.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, in this case, it seems very clear-cut to me, basic common sense and moral values. If somebody has dual nationality, or if they're of a foreign nationality, they've committed a crime of this scale, they should serve their sentence and they should be deported. No ifs, no buts. In terms of why we can't do this, in some cases it's due to bureaucratic indifference and incompetence, but there is a sort of European Convention of Human Rights element to it, because we have the Human Rights Act. This enshrines the ECHR into domestic law, and you have what's called the principle of non-refoulement. So it's very difficult to deport people to their country of origin if there's any risk of harassment or humiliation in some way. So that does absolutely have an impact on deportations.